Tan Kam loathed the early hours of the city morning. She was a creature of the night, one of those souls who only truly came alive when the sun vanished. Her friend, Duong Thi Thi, always teased her, saying she had the spirit of an owl, sleeping through the golden dawn and laboring under the pale moon. Her profession demanded such a schedule. She was a freelance writer, churning out manuscripts for a periodic magazine. It was not a career that brought her a windfall of wealth, but it sustained her. Years ago, when she held the prestigious position of director for the city's largest advertising firm, her income had been astronomical. Occasionally, when she would step into a bank to withdraw funds, she would stare at the balance on the screen and realize with a jolt of surprise that she could simply stop. She had amassed enough to retire right then and there, to live a life of quiet comfort until her hair turned white, unless, of course, she had the scandalous intention of keeping a secret lover. After walking away from the suffocating pressure of the advertising world, she turned her heart toward writing novels. She didn't do it for the meager royalties or the fleeting vanity of a fanbase. What mattered most to her was the silence, the chance to finally rest. From the time she was a small child, she had been conditioned to struggle alone, like a clockwork toy that had been wound too tight, forced to march forward without end. But now, the gears had slowed. The tension in the spring was finally beginning to uncoil. The events of the previous evening had kept her awake until the sky began to bleed into a pale gray. When she finally drifted into a heavy, dreamless slumber, she was unaware of the frantic buzzing of her phone. When she eventually stirred and checked the screen, she saw a long string of missed calls. She had left it on vibrate, and the silence had been absolute. Hurriedly, she dialed Duong Thi Thi back. The moment the line connected, a wall of exuberant noise hit her, a cacophony of cheers and laughter from a crowd of people. Listening closely through the static of the celebration, she recognized the high-pitched, excited voices of Lucan Kai and Lam Kai. Duong Thi Thi's voice broke through the din, breathless and ecstatic. "It's finished. The sewing is completely done. You have to get over here right now and see it." "Done already?" Tan Kam felt a shiver of disbelief. How could it possibly be finished so quickly? Not even half a day had passed since they handed over the fabric. The old proverb rang true, with enough money, one can even buy the gods. The sheer speed of the tailoring was a testament to just how desperate and impatient her three friends were to possess those garments. She didn't waste a moment. Looking over at her precious cat, Hak Bao, who was curled into a tight, sleeping ball in its wicker basket, she gently pulled the door shut. She didn't dare bring the cat with her. If Hak Bao were to get spooked and bolt into the city streets again, she didn't think she would have the strength to find him a second time. The moment she arrived at Duong Thi Thi's residence, she practically sprinted inside. A strange, invisible force seemed to be tugging at her spirit, a silent command compelling her to focus every ounce of her being on that specific set of clothes. Her heart hammered against her ribs with such violence that she could hear the rhythmic thud in her ears. It was a terrifyingly familiar sensation, like the breathless, nauseating adrenaline of a first date. The grand living room was eerie and deserted. The domestic staff, draped in clinical, stark white uniforms, didn't say a word. They merely shifted their eyes, gesturing toward the dressing room at the end of the hall. Tan Kam ran, her footsteps muffled by the expensive rugs, forgetting the basic courtesy of knocking. She burst into the room, her eyes locking onto the garment rack standing like a sentinel in the center of the floor. There, hanging under the bright lights, was a cheongsam. It was a deep, visceral red, shimmering with a brilliance that seemed almost liquid, perfectly tailored to the height of modern fashion. She turned her head and saw other pieces draped nearby: a trendy, sleeveless bib top, a matching headscarf, and a long, flowing red scarf. Duong Thi Thi let out a jubilant cry when she saw her. "Tan Kam! Look at it! Have you ever seen a set of clothes as hauntingly beautiful as this in your entire life? Hurry up and change so we can admire the full effect." Lucan Kai urged, her voice trembling with a manic sort of impatience. Lam Kai laughed, her eyes bright with a strange fire. TT insisted on waiting for you to arrive before she put it on. She wanted you to be the very first person to witness her in this red silk. Now that Tan Cam is here, TT, go. Put it on. Once we're dressed, we're heading straight to the grand opening of Jimmy's bar. We're going to walk in there and make the rest of the world go blind with envy. Tan Cam felt a cold prickle of anxiety. Everything was moving too perfectly, too smoothly. It was an unnatural progression that defied logic. She reached out and touched the red scarf. Because there hadn't been enough of the mysterious fabric to go around, she and Lucan Kai had used the remnants to design the headscarf and the neck scarf. The bib belonged to Lamb, Kentucky. There had been so little fabric left over that every scrap had been utilized to its absolute limit. The women scrambled to claim their pieces, their faces flushed with a disturbing sense of pride. As Tan Cam's fingers brushed against the silk of her scarf, an overwhelming wave of emotion crashed over her. She felt an obsessive, primal urge to wrap the fabric around her throat immediately. As she gripped it, the texture felt unnervingly like pressing her palms against soft, warm human skin. She wanted to rub the fabric against her face. The silk was so unnaturally smooth and cool that it felt like a seductive caress. Duong Thi Thi was the first to emerge from behind the changing screen. She was breathtaking. Tan Cam had been her classmate for more years than she could count. She had seen TT in every state of dress and undress, every style of makeup, every mood. It was no exaggeration to say that Tan Cam knew every blemish and every hair on TT's body. But today, the woman standing before her was a stranger. She no longer looked like a mortal being. The Cheongsam clung to her body like a second skin, tracing every curve with predatory precision, yet it maintained an air of chilling elegance. Under the overhead lights, that mesmerizing shade of red seemed to pulse, emitting a soft, rhythmic glow. Wherever TT moved, the shadows in the room seemed to retreat, as if she were the sole source of color in a gray world. Her face looked ethereal, and the sleeveless cut of the dress revealed arms as white and smooth as polished jade, making everyone in the room ache to reach out and touch her. Before Tan Cam could even find the words to praise her, Lam Kai appeared wearing the red bib. When the two stood side by side, they radiated a classic, haunting Chinese beauty. They possessed the sultry, heavy-lidded grace of ancient beauties reclining on silk divans, tender, coquettish, and utterly mesmerizing. It was a beauty that was not loud or garish, but deeply, unsettlingly profound. Tan Cam forced a weak joke to break the spell. "My dear goddesses, which part of the mortal realm do you plan to grace with your presence today?" "It doesn't matter where we go," Duong Thi Thi replied, her voice sounding distant yet sharp. "Beautiful clothes are meant to be stared at." She was so agitated with excitement that she nearly ran out the door without her shoes, desperate to be seen by the world. Lam Kai stared at her own reflection in the full-length mirror, whispering to herself as if in a trance, "I never knew. I never knew I could be this beautiful." Lucan Kai pouted slightly, looking over at Tan Cam. "Tan Cam, stop daydreaming and help me tie this scarf." As the red fabric was looped around Lucan Kai's neck, the reflection of the crimson silk cast a flush onto her skin, making her features appear vividly, almost unnaturally, alive. Tan Cam was the only one who felt a lingering sense of melancholy. A heavy scarf was a garment meant for the biting chill of late autumn or winter. Who in their right mind would wrap such a thing around their neck in the sweltering, oppressive heat of midsummer? Her three friends, sensing her hesitation, crowded around her. They ignored her logic and began to playfully force the scarf onto her. In that moment, a bizarre sensation washed over Tan Cam, a sudden, heavy lethargy that made her want to stop resisting their games. But just as the fabric was about to touch her skin, a sound cut through the air. It was a faint, sharp meow of a cat, right next to her ear. The sound acted like a jolt of electricity. Tan Cam snapped back to her senses and threw her hands up, blocking them from tying the scarf around her throat. "Hak Bao! Hak Bao is here looking for me," she blurted out. She spun around and ran out of the room, searching the hallway and the adjacent lounge, but there was no sign of the black cat. The house was silent. She walked back into the dressing room, breathless. "Did you guys not hear that? The cat?" "We didn't hear a thing," TT replied, her eyes fixed on her own reflection. "Maybe you've just missed Hack Bao so much that you're starting to lose your mind." "No," Tan Kam insisted, shaking her head. "Hack Bao came home last night. He's back." "He's back? Truly?" Lucan Kai asked, pausing her preening. "Then why didn't you bring him with you?" "I wasn't foolish enough to bring him out," Tan Kam said, her voice trembling slightly. "If he ran away again, I'd probably drop dead from the stress of searching. You wouldn't believe what happened. While I was digging through a literal mountain of trash to find him, I ran into an old acquaintance. The man actually thought I was a homeless scavenger woman. Can you believe the nerve of that guy?" The memory of the man, the strange exorcist she had encountered, filled her with a sudden, hot flash of irritation. The three other women froze for a heartbeat, staring at her with wide, vacant eyes, before they suddenly erupted into a chorus of harsh, jarring laughter. What kind of legendary, high and mighty character actually had the audacity to look at our precious Tan Kam and mistake her for a common street scavenger, a mere trash picker? Duong Thi Thi's voice dripped with playful mockery as she teased her friend, her eyes dancing with amusement. "You absolutely must lead us to him, Kam. We have to see this man for ourselves. Anyone who can't see your elegance must be something truly special." Tan Kam's face was flushed with a simmering, unyielding rage that she couldn't quite shake off. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. "Meet him? For what? Why on earth would I want to see a man like that again? He's nothing but an uneducated fraud, a charlatan who lives for nothing but lies and deception. He goes around pretending to be a holy man, a saintly figure who claims he can catch ghosts and exorcise demons. Believe me, the best thing anyone can do is stay as far away from a creep like that as possible. Are you really that upset?" Duong Thi Thi continued to probe, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Maybe you've actually developed some feelings for the guy. Otherwise, you wouldn't be this furious. Tell the truth now, is he some secret crush you've been pining for in the shadows? A secret crush? On him?" Tan Kam scoffed, her lip curling in disgust. "I would have to be stone-cold blind to choose a man like that. TT, you have no idea. That man is the one who gave me that hideous nickname in the first place. He's the reason I'm being mocked." Upon hearing this, Duong Thi Thi collapsed onto the floor, rolling around in a fit of uncontrollable, wheezing laughter. Between gasps for air, she managed to tease Tan Kam further. "It turns out he's your sworn enemy from a past life. And he even dared to call you a scavenger? It seems the two of you are truly bound by a strange, twisted destiny. There's a karmic connection there, I'm sure of it." Tan Kam reached out and gave her a sharp, playful kick. "Get up! The sun has already vanished and it's pitch black outside, yet here you are lying on the floor laughing at me. Let's move. It's time for you to go out there and show off what you've got." Lucan Kai laughed along with them as she grabbed her bag, preparing to leave. As she passed by Lam Kai, she suddenly stopped. She heard Lam Kai whisper in a voice that sounded uncharacteristically small and frail. "I don't know why," Lam Kai murmured, "but I feel a sudden, bone-chilling cold washing over my entire body." "Well, look at what you're wearing," An Kai joked, dismissing the concern with a wave of her hand. "You're dressed so lightly, of course you're going to feel a chill. Fashion has its price, doesn't it?" The four of them walked out together, heading toward the bar. They had spent hours on their makeup, applying it with a clinical, lethal precision. They looked less like socialites and more like ancient warriors painting their faces for a bloody, decisive campaign. The atmosphere inside the car was thick and oppressive, heavy with a palpable sense of predatory intent. They silently swore a solemn oath to hunt and kill, to ensnare and humiliate any lustful man who dared to cross their path tonight. Tan Kam, however, felt a pang of self-pity. She didn't have the vibrant red fabric background she had hoped for to make her stand out. Watching her three friends sit there so carelessly, touching up their makeup and showering each other with superficial praise, her heart grew heavy with boredom and frustration. She felt like a mere shadow, a background prop meant only to make them shine brighter. Yet, no matter how much resentment simmered within her, there was nothing she could do. It was better to just sit there in silence and endure it. When they finally stepped out of the car, Tan Kam was hit by a wave of sensation she had never truly experienced before, the feeling of being the absolute center of gravity, watched by hundreds, perhaps tens of thousands of hungry, admiring eyes. It was no wonder so many people craved the life of a celebrity, desperate for that intoxicating rush of being loved and adored by the masses. The feeling of being a public figure, the singular focal point of a room, was exhilarating. Every eye in the vicinity was locked onto them. A single, fluid, graceful turn of Lam Kai's body was enough to leave men breathless and intoxicated. Duong Thi Thi's sleeveless cheongsam, the swan XAM, clung to her curves so perfectly that it drew audible gasps of wonder from the crowd. In short, their entrance was a magnificent success. They all shared the same thought: to be adored with such feverish intensity was worth any amount of suffering or effort. Their presence was so striking that even the wealthy ladies in the room couldn't look away. A few of them, casting aside their usual social graces and etiquette, even approached the girls to ask, "Where on earth did you order these outfits? They are absolutely stunning." The four girls simply offered mysterious, practiced smiles and said nothing. As they reached the entrance of the bar, the crowd of men parted like the Red Sea, creating a wide path for them to walk through. A few men even stepped forward eagerly, acting as if they were their personal bodyguards. The girls' pride swelled even further. Lam Kai let out a soft sigh of satisfaction. "In the past, I called myself a fashion queen, but what a waste that was. I've never felt this powerful, this magnificent, or this full of pride until tonight." The number of people gathering just to catch a glimpse of them grew larger by the minute. They had become the prized treasures of the establishment, scrutinized and admired from every possible angle. It felt as though the entire bar had been opened specifically for their arrival. There were, of course, some men who took a long, hard look at themselves and realized they simply didn't meet the standards required to pursue such women. Knowing they were outmatched, they wisely retreated into the shadows. They had no desire to become the targets of the more powerful gentlemen in the room. Those who remained, refusing to back down, were the elite men who were either obscenely wealthy, held high social status, or already had some degree of acquaintance with the girls. The four women bloomed under the attention, their faces glowing like fresh flowers in the sun. Only Lam Kai seemed indifferent to the general crowd. Her mind was already fixed on a specific target. Her prey had been marked long ago, the chairman of the board of the city's largest diamond empire. He was a man who had inherited a vast ancestral fortune, yet he was also young, strikingly handsome, and notoriously passionate. Every beautiful woman in the city dreamt of taming this particular beast. Lam Kai had wanted to ensnare him for a very long time, but the right opportunity had never presented itself. A man of his stature was incredibly arrogant. Normally, no matter how beautiful Lam Kai looked, he would give her a passing glance twice at most before moving on. She sat down gracefully, projecting an aura of calm, and waited for him. Exactly as she had calculated, the predator began to move toward her. She felt his presence before she saw him. His fingers began to glide softly across the smooth, porcelain skin of her bare back. However, his fingernails were unexpectedly sharp, and as they scraped against her spine, they left a faint, stinging trail of pain. In that singular moment, she felt a surge of high-voltage stimulation. It was like a match being struck violently against the side of a box. A sudden hiss followed by a burst of flame that threatened to consume her. The breathing of both individuals became ragged and uneven. He reached out, his arm coiling around her waist like a serpent, pulling her into a tight, suffocating embrace. Then, he leaned in and spoke with a voice that was smooth, deep, and dangerously seductive. "Be careful," he whispered. "I wouldn't want you to fall." The words were as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, sending a wave of paralysis through Lam Kai's body. The man continued, his lips brushing against her ear. "This place doesn't suit you. It's far too crowded. Let's go find somewhere quiet, somewhere where we can be alone." She nodded, her heart overflowing with a sense of triumph and intoxicating happiness. In a heartbeat, the Cinderella of the advertising world had been transformed into a true princess. She was ecstatic because her long-held dream was finally manifesting into reality. She allowed herself to be swept away, drugged by the sheer intensity of this perceived luck. She stood up and walked away with him, her movements light and airy. Tan Kam and the others were so caught up in their own revelry and the adoration of the crowd that they didn't even notice their friend leaving. Located directly above Jimmy's bar was a prestigious five-star hotel. The staff greeted them with profound, silent respect. When they entered the presidential suite, the sheer opulence of the room was breathtaking. Lam Kai and the young heir could no longer restrain the burning fire of desire that had been ignited downstairs. They lunged at each other, their bodies tangling together in a desperate, frantic dance. They exchanged scorching, feverish kisses as their primal urges took total control of their senses. When Lam Kai reached back to untie the silk ribbons of her yem, the traditional halter top she wore, the young man stopped her. His eyes were dark, clouded with an obsessive hunger. He told her that she looked irresistibly, hauntingly beautiful in that garment, and he insisted she keep it on. The two of them surrendered to the darkness of their passions. They reached peak after peak of intensity, their excitement spiraling out of control until they were screaming into the empty air of the suite. The entire room seemed to drown in a thick, stifling atmosphere of lust, filled with nothing but the sounds of rhythmic groans and heavy, desperate gasps for air. When the storm finally subsided, the man gently slid away from Lam Kentucky. He lay there, his chest heaving as he spoke through his ragged breath. "In all my life, I have never experienced anything like that. I've never felt so satisfied. Making love to you, it was as if I was merging with the bodies of two completely different women at the same time. You are truly unique, Lam Kentucky. There is something profoundly different about you." Lam Kai let out a soft, triumphant smile. It seemed the golden boy had finally been hooked, deep and true. To her, being a manager at an advertising agency suddenly felt meaningless and small. Her greatest ambition, her true North Star, was to marry into a life of immense wealth and power. She thought of Duong Thi Thi's family fortune and how much everyone envied it. Who wouldn't want that for themselves? Who wouldn't crave that level of security and status? Lam Kai's smile widened with a sense of smug satisfaction. She reached out and gently stroked the silk fabric of her yem. She realized then that a truly beautiful woman possessed a power that was no different from a dark, extraordinary sorcery. Feeling a sudden burst of celebratory joy, she reached for the glass of red wine resting on the nightstand and drained it in one gulp. She stood up and began to walk toward the bathroom, her silhouette flickering in the dim light. The young heir sat back against the headboard, his eyes glazed and ecstatic, watching her shadow retreat into the darkness. The water from the five-star hotel's showerhead pelted down upon her body with a powerful, rhythmic force, creating an incredibly pleasant sensation. She didn't even want to take her clothes off. The soaked fabric of her garment clung tightly to her skin, sodden and heavy. It felt strangely comforting, like a second layer of skin newly formed over her own, and she gently caressed the wet cloth as if it were a part of her very being. Lam Kai wondered to herself, she didn't even know since when everything had started to go so smoothly for her. Perhaps it was since she acquired this piece of fabric? She realized that this cloth possessed the power to change one's destiny and fortune. Closing her eyes, she recalled the blind old woman, the mother of Mr. Ho, the tailor, and thought to herself, if that old woman could only see such a beautiful camisole garment, she surely wouldn't have opposed it so fiercely. She stood there under the showerhead, the water cascading down from above while the entire bathroom became shrouded in a thick, hazy mist. The steam slowly coiled around her, enveloping her in its warm embrace. Suddenly, the water turned icy cold. She let out a sharp cry of shock and scrambled backward, unable to stop herself from swearing under her breath, "And they call this a 5-star hotel? This is absolutely pathetic. A guest is right in the middle of a shower and the water just turns freezing like this. Later, I must definitely lodge a complaint about the staff's lack of care and service." Lam Kai was both furious and shivering as she reached for a bath towel. The wet camisole made her feel a piercing chill. As she turned her body around, she glanced into the mirror, which was clouded with thick steam. It seemed as though something was draped over her body. Terrified, she looked down at herself, but she only saw her camisole. She raised her head again to look into the mirror and still saw something hanging off her. Looking closer, her heart stopped. It turned out to be a person. It felt as if a wave of frigid air surged up from beneath her. Pure horror. She stood frozen in place, paralyzed. The cold water continued to spray down, and the layer of steam gradually began to dissipate, slowly revealing the figure in the mirror with haunting clarity. It was a woman with long, matted hair. The entity's arms were draped over Lam Kai's neck, its 2 legs wrapped tightly around her waist, and its entire body was a visceral, crimson red. Lam Kai slowly raised her hand to touch it, realizing with a jolt that this was no hallucination. She felt the creature's hand. It was simultaneously warm and smooth, yet bone-chillingly cold and strangely familiar. Is this woman actually the red camisole itself? A terrifying question flashed through her mind. Yes, that was it. Its arms were the 2 straps of the garment draped over her neck, its legs were the fabric hugging her waist, and its head was buried deep into her chest. Never in her life had she been this terrified. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't because the creature's 2 hands were tightening their grip around her throat, choking the life out of her. She wanted to run, but she was unable to move because its legs were shackled around her own. In a state of utter desperation, she looked down to see that its head was burrowing into her bosom. Its long hair was soaking wet, and upon its naked, crimson skin, fresh, wet blood glistened. At that very moment, the woman who had been burying her head in Lam Kai's chest slowly began to lift her head upward. Lam Kai could not tear her eyes away as a face, hidden beneath a mass of tangled black hair, slowly revealed itself. Fresh blood gushed from 2 hollow eye sockets. It had no eyes. This was the final thought that crossed Lam Kai's mind. That face, drenched in gore, was curling its lips into a sinister smirk at her. The sound of rushing, splashing water continued to echo from the bathroom. The young nobleman had been waiting outside for a long time and still hadn't seen Lam Kai emerge. He was growing impatient. The excitement this mysterious girl provided had sent his head spinning. He gently pushed open the bathroom door and saw Lam Kai wearing the wet camisole. She was hunched over the sink, washing something, her long hair draped down, concealing her face, while her lower body remained completely bare. He stepped softly behind Lam Kai and wrapped his arms around her waist. At this moment, she looked incredibly seductive. He once again could not resist the fire of passion burning within him. Continuing to slide his hand down her body, he spoke in a delirious, trance-like state, "My darling, what are you doing?" His hand brushed against something round and very slippery. Curious, he pulled his hand back to see what it was, but the moment he caught a glimpse, his entire body froze stiff. It was a human eye. The white part of the eye had become swollen from the pelting water, but the pupil remained jet black. Under the daylight lamps, it shone brightly, staring at him with pure hatred. He shrieked in terror as he looked at Lam Kai's hands. In her palm was the other eye, being rinsed under the running tap. Her fingers gently caressed the eye in the basin, under her touch and the pressure of the water, it looked extraordinarily lifelike, as if it were still resting in an eye socket. However, both pupils were fixed on him with a look of vengeful malice. He stood there, rooted to the spot in paralyzing fear. Lam Kai slowly turned her body around. Her two eye sockets were overflowing with fresh blood, her face drenched in gore that dripped steadily onto her camisole. With an uncanny, emotionless expression, she slowly raised her hand toward his mouth and replied, "Washing my eyes." The eye in her hand was slick and slippery, threatening to slide right toward his lips. He could no longer react. He only knew that the two eyes Lam Kai had gouged out with her own hands were staring intensely at him. Lam Kai raised her right hand, holding a toothbrush, and used all her strength to snap it in half. The young nobleman intended to flee, but by then, it was already too late. He no longer saw the camisole. Instead, he saw the woman with long hair, covered in blood, draped over Lam Kai's jade-like neck. Its arms were crossed behind her neck, its legs gripped her waist tightly, and its head was buried deep within her rounded breasts, its hair winding around her body like thick vines. It raised the middle and index fingers of its right hand, continuously making a gouging motion in the air. In the midst of his terror, he suddenly felt a sharp, agonizing pain. The broken toothbrush in Lam Kai's hand had plunged into his left eye. Fresh blood gushed out in torrents, and he collapsed to the floor. Lam Kai lunged forward, straddling him, and began to gently gouge out his eye, slowly chanting with every rhythmic thrust, "Gouge! Gouge! Gouge!" With his remaining eye, he saw the woman clinging to Lam Kai's chest slowly turn its head. He realized that it, too, had no eyes, and its blood-drenched face was twisting into a bizarre, grotesque smile. After that came another sharp sensation of pain, then everything went pitch black. He could no longer see anything at all.